I shouldn't be smiling because my sweater, it has this edge that something got caught on it and it just unraveled. Have you ever had anything like that happen to one of your favorite garments and you just wish you could have a little magic happen to it so that it could be like new again? Well, this episode of On the Mend, I'm going to show you how to do just that. This is what the edge is supposed to look like. And this is what I've got going on right now. Ooh, not very attractive, is it? So how do we sew that with a regular sewing machine? We use the correct thread and needles and the Satinedge foot by Creative Feet. The correct needle to use for sewing through sweater is the Jersey, but you can use a stretch needle should you have the stretch needle and not the Jersey. The ball point tip of the actual Jersey needle is a bit more rounded, and there's other anatomy changes to the structure of the needle to ensure that the needle enters the stretch fabric and exits it without causing any shredding above the eye of the needle. So I'm using the Jersey needle for this. And now the thread to use. I'm going to use lingerie thread in the bobbin. Now, don't be mistaken to think that lingerie thread is just for lingerie fabric. It's simply a nylon thread that's not monofilament. It has a really strong structure to it. It's stretchy because they designed it for stretchy fabrics like t-shirts and lingerie materials. So it comes in white and black on creativefeet.com, and the white is pretty much invisible on from white to somewhat medium pastel colors. Once you get into the red zone of colors and then darker, then you'll use the black color. So what it does is it kind of reflects. It's like a mirror, and whatever color it sits next to or is stitched into, it reflects. It's really hard to find in the garment after you sew it in, and a lovely thread to add to your sewing stash. The lingerie thread's also fantastic for decorative stitches in the bobbin and monogramming, applique, and also your machine embroidery, because the thread stretches as it goes through the bobbin winding tension and increases the tension just by putting it in the machine. You don't have to get your screwdriver out and get all scared because you've adjusted your bobbin tension. And why you do that normally is to stop the bobbin thread from popping to the top, but because the nylon thread is so strong, it stays down in the bottom. It goes, I'm not coming up to the top. You can't make me. So the perfect thread for in the bobbin for certain techniques. Now I have two different polyester threads here. I have my 40 weight that I like to use in garments and also for applique and embroidery, monogramming on the top because it has this beautiful sheen to it. It reflects the light. And this is the brand that we carry at creativefeet.com. This is the Polyfast by Wonderfill. Lovely thread, designed to be really reflective and be really shiny. And then they have another one, the Invisifill, which is designed to be very subtle, to not reflect the light. And they call that being cottonized, basically making a polyester thread look like cotton thread on your fabric. And since this sweater is mostly cotton with a little bit of synthetic in there, I want it to feel the same and look the same. I don't want to have one section of this hemline to be all shiny and show-offy. I want it to drop in and just look like nothing ever went wrong with this sweater. Claire did not wear it and get it stuck on something and have the thread unraveled behind her. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. 100 weight polyester is really thin, so you can use even a 10 needle with it and not have any problem with the stitches getting scrunched up above the eye of the needle. Now the foot to use is the Satinedge foot. The Satinedge foot that I designed for a blind sewer to sew right on the edge will replace the need for a serger. And this is basically what we're doing. We're going to replace it really was a knitting machine that formed that edge of the stitch, but let's just say that it was done by an overlock machine. If you have an overlock stitch on a garment and it unravels, you can then go ahead and sew it back together using the Satinedge foot. It comes packaged like this with adapters inside, and these adapters are snap-on, which snap right on to the presser foot, onto the little snap-on bar that you see there. So you see how it has a little snap-on bar, and this adapter, you just push it on, and then it is secure. Now this is a 7mm wide snap-on bar presser foot with an adapter on it that turned it into a high shank, or no, it's actually a super high adapter, which can then be just taken off. You first want to try attaching it to your sewing machine though, because odds are you're going to be able to just snap it right on, just like you do with your traditional feet on your sewing machine. And this container that the foot is in, everything fits back inside of it, and you can just snap it closed so that you have all the items you need for the next sewing project. This is a full bobbin of the nylon lingerie thread that I've already wound at half speed. If you can't control the speed of your sewing machine when it's winding a bobbin, just wind the bobbin half full, because the strength of this thread, as it goes through the tension assembly and it's being wound, it stretches and releases and stretches and releases, and it's really, really tight on the bobbin and creates a heat. The plastic bobbin center core can shrink, and the top and the bottom of the bobbin can pop off because its stretching behavior is making it add more thread to the bobbin than the bobbin is designed to hold. If you have a metal bobbin, well, it can actually heat up the bobbin and make the bobbin grow longer. And then you'll be wondering, whose bobbin do you have in your hand? This is bigger than all the other bobbins I have. So just remember, half speed or half full, and you'll be good to go with the nylon thread in your bobbin. You might think that you need stabilizer because it's on the edge and it's stretchy and it's all spread apart. But some magic happens with the Satinedge presser foot, so you don't need any stabilizer. The Satinedge foot has a little wire that is connected to the white guide on the presser foot itself. And what we're trying to do is get the guide wire and the sewing machine needle to line up so that the right swing of your needle goes just over the guide and the left swing goes on the fabric. I'm going to use a 4mm wide zigzag stitch. That would be 4 on your stitch width dial if you don't know that it's millimeters. And the length of the stitch should be between 1/2 and 1 stitch length, which would be the equivalent of about 25 stitches per inch. Or you might even go as high as 30 stitches per inch. We're going to go ahead and test it to determine the proper stitch length for this sweater with this thread based on what I want it to look like. And what I want it to look like is what it already looked like before. So this is what the stitch is supposed to look like, with this nice edge on it. We don't want to lose all stretch because this does have the ability to stretch to some degree. This is partly why we want the lingerie thread in the bobbin, because it's stretchy. A zigzag stitch is also stretchy. Once you know that you have the needle and the foot lined up according to the instructions that are easy to understand, and there are illustrations so that you know that you have things set up correctly. With your needle in the position that it's going to go on the edge of the sweater, you can select your knot stitch and tie a knot. If you don't have the ability to tie a knot stitch, you want to leave a long length of thread so that you can tie it off afterward. Or you can take the thread after you've sewn a stitch and bring the thread up and through the foot's opening. So it's right here coming up where it was stitched. And I'm going to sew over that thread a little bit. And after sewing for about 1 inch, we can cut that thread off. And continue sewing. Before I get too far, I'm going to compare what my stitch looks like to what the sweater had on it originally. Can you tell the difference between that and that? So once you know that you can't tell the difference, then you know that you're good to go. And you can go ahead and use a pair of scissors to help keep the fabrics pushed up against the white part of the guide. The guide on the foot is lined up with the needle. So as long as the stitch is going up against the white part of the guide, it is in line. Now I have a thick body of thread where the seam is, and in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and increase the stitch length. I went from 0.7 to 1.0. Remember, that stitch length has to do with the thickness of the thread and the thickness of the fabric. So increasing the stitch length makes the sewing machine get over the bump easier. I'm going to take it even more, go all the way to 1.4 on the stitch length. You guys remember what my stitch length was set at? Because once I get over the bump, I need to go back to that. And I remember it was 0.7. And what is that stitch length based on? It's based on the thread thickness. In this case, I'm using a very, very thin thread. Now, when you go from one style knit from the other, you may have to alter your stitch length because this area is stretchier than that area. So I'm going to take it even lower. And when you use a really short stitch length, what you're doing is the feed dogs are pulling these knit fibers together, as long as you aren't pulling from behind the foot. You can see how it's starting to climb. So I'm taking my scissors and pushing it down. And then toward the guide. So you don't have to watch the needle zigzagging left and right. If you haven't sewn like this before with your needle swinging on the fabric and then off the fabric, well, now you know you can. You just needed the right foot. The Satinedge foot I designed for a blind sewer so she didn't have to get a serger. Well, she wanted a serger because that's the kind of person she was. Determined and very inspirational. So I thank her for coming into our store. I was 19 when I met Mary, who was born blind and deaf. I'm now over 60 years old. It's a long life, and a lot of people have been enjoying using this foot. Notice that my elbow is resting on the table. I don't really have to lean forward to look at the needle because the foot is set to the needle's position. And you just sew. When I come up to the end, I actually shorten my stitch length a little bit because the end of the fabric tends to want to go, I'm not going into the foot. So if we shorten it even a little bit more, it is then pulled in a little bit slower, and then it doesn't feel so worried about getting caught. I don't know. The sweater clearly does not have a feeling or emotion, but this helps me to imagine how it might be and keep me from forgetting to shorten the stitch length on the corners as I'm approaching them. Now, as I get to the corner, I'm going to do something different than you might be thinking. Go all the way to the end. Stop with the needle in the raised position, and then you lift the foot and pull gently off of that guide pin that we set up the stitch to. And now I'm going to flip the fabric over and sew back into this a little bit with the guide again off the edge of the fabric. In this way, that stitch is not going to get caught on anything. Because when you increase the stitch length, it makes it easier for the foot to get back up on the sweater. And now to tie the knot, we always make sure our needle's in the position that it's going to come down on the sweater, and then go ahead and use your knot stitch. But really, there's no way this stitch is going to come out because you've stitched back over the end already so much. So where the two came together, this one's a little bit lighter. I could go over this again to make it even thicker, but I know nobody's looking that close at my sweater's hemline but me. And I know that's not going to continue to unravel, so I won't be walking around with a little thread tail behind me. If you enjoyed this episode of On the Mend, be sure to hit the like button and share with your friends. And also subscribe to my channel. If you're enjoying learning how to mend things, well, be sure to watch the next episode where I hopefully successfully will fix the snag that I did on the shoulder of one of my favorite sweaters. See you next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye.